sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Definitely. Always ready to dive in.
Well, today we're looking into all the buzz about President Trump revoking the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965.
Yeah, it's been making headlines.
Big change, right? This law, it's been around for, 60 years? Huge impact on hiring practices, preventing discrimination, and now, poof, gone.
I think a lot of folks are still trying to wrap their heads around it. It really is a pretty big shift in how we've been thinking about, equality in the workplace for decades.
I mean, this isn't just tweaking a policy here. This feels like a whole different philosophy. For so long, the focus has been on actively fighting discrimination and pushing for more diversity. And now it seems like we're going in reverse.
That's one way to put it, yeah. This whole idea of a colorblind approach is definitely gaining traction. Trump's been pretty vocal about it, calling DEI practices illegal discrimination and preferences.
Wow, yeah. Illegal discrimination and preferences. That's some pretty strong language.
Absolutely.
It almost feels like we're going back in time, back to the days before we had laws to protect people from being discriminated against.
Well, to understand what's happening now, I think it helps to look back a bit. Like, the 1965 Act, it didn't just appear out of nowhere.
Right.
It came at a time when, America was really wrestling with this whole issue of civil rights, racial segregation, discrimination, all of that.
Yeah.
This act was part of this, I guess you could say, wave of change happening.
Yeah, wave of change driven by people who were tired of being treated like second-class citizens.
Right, exactly.
So can you remind us what this act actually did? Like, how did it change things in the workplace?
Well, before 1965, you could literally be denied a job just because of your race, religion, or gender. It was totally legal.
Wow. Seriously.
Imagine applying for a job and being told, sorry, we don't hire women for this role, or this company only employs people of a certain faith. I mean, it sounds crazy now, but that was the reality.
It's mind-boggling to think that was acceptable back then.
The Equal Employment Opportunity Act made those practices illegal, at least in federal workplaces, and for companies working with the government.
Okay, so it covered a pretty big chunk of the workforce.
It did, and it forced companies to at least consider candidates from different backgrounds. It opened doors that were basically slammed shut before.
So it wasn't just about creating a level playing field. It was about creating a playing field, period.
Yeah, exactly. And it did make a difference. After the act, we saw more women, more minorities in jobs, especially government jobs. Of course, it wasn't perfect, but it was a big step forward.
A big step forward. But now it seems like we're taking a step back.
Yeah, there's definitely this feeling of a pendulum swing, like we're almost seeing a backlash against all those efforts to make things fairer.
So how did we get here? What happened between 1965 and now? I mean, we had all these protests in 2020. The whole Black Lives Matter movement really brought the issue of racial injustice back into the spotlight. Then the DEI movement started gaining momentum. And then...
Right, the DEI movement, yeah, it was like a counter movement to that, a backlash against the whole push for diversity and inclusion. Some people started arguing that these DEI programs were actually discriminating against certain groups, mainly white men.
So it's become a kind of tug of war between these two viewpoints.
Exactly. And President Trump has really tapped into that sentiment. He's framing this executive order as a way to create a merit-based system where everyone is judged only on their qualifications.
A colorblind society where everyone is treated equally, regardless of their race or gender.
That's the idea, yes.
Sounds good on the surface, but is it really possible in a society where systemic inequalities still exist?
Yeah.
Can you really have a truly colorblind system when the playing field itself is tilted?
That's the core of the debate. The meritocracy idea, it's appealing on the surface, but critics argue that it ignores the historical and ongoing disadvantages that certain groups face. Like if you start the race a mile behind everyone else, it doesn't matter how fast you run, you're probably not going to win. This whole executive order, it begs the question, are we just masking the problems by pretending they don't exist? Or are we serious about fixing them?
Big questions, and we're going to get into those. But first, I'm curious, what actually happened after Trump signed this thing?
Things moved fast. The Office of Personnel Management, they're the ones who oversee federal employees. They ordered all the agencies to put anyone involved in DEI programs on leave, like administrative leave.
Wow, so right away, people were being sidelined.
Yep, And then they told agencies to start making lists, basically lists of companies, universities, even foundations to investigate, potential legal action for their DEI programs.
So it wasn't just talk. He was serious about making changes.
It sent a pretty clear signal that this wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a real shift in policy.
A shift that has a lot of people worried.
Definitely.
So this executive order, does it actually say what specific DEI programs would be considered illegal?
That's where things get a little fuzzy, you see. The wording is really broad. It throws around words like preferences and mandates, but doesn't really explain what they actually mean in practice.
Sounds like a lawyer's dream or nightmare, depending on which side you're on.
Exactly. A lot of companies are probably scratching their heads wondering, are we going to get sued for this? Is this okay? We're going to see a ton of lawsuits trying to sort this all out.
So it's a waiting game.
Yeah, pretty much. And while everyone's waiting, there's this fear, that companies might just overreact and start cutting back their DEI programs, even the ones that are totally legal, just to avoid any risk.
Kind of like a chilling effect.
Exactly. Like suddenly we're back in the dark ages where only certain people have access to the best opportunities. Back to the old boys club.
The executive order says it wants to level the playing field, but it seems like it could actually make things worse for those who are already struggling.
It's a real paradox, isn't it? This whole idea of colorblindness sounds great in theory, but in reality, it can actually make inequalities worse because it ignores all those systemic factors that contribute to them.
Okay, so what does all this mean for someone, say, just looking for a job or trying to get ahead in their career? What advice would you give them in this new kind of uncertain environment?
Well, the first thing is stay informed. Keep up with what's happening, both with the legal stuff and what's going on in your particular industry. Know your rights, and don't be afraid to speak up if you think you've been discriminated against.
Sounds like this whole thing has just created a minefield for people trying to navigate the job market.
Yeah, it adds another layer of complexity for sure. And for companies who are genuinely trying to build diverse and inclusive workplaces, well, this executive order is a real curveball.
So do companies just have to abandon all their DEI efforts just to avoid getting into trouble?
It's a tough spot, that's for sure. They'll need to talk to lawyers, make sure what they're doing is actually legal. But that doesn't mean throwing in the towel on diversity. They just might need to be more creative, find new ways to promote inclusion that fit within these new rules.
So it's about finding a balance between staying out of legal hot water and staying true to the values of fairness and equality.
That's it. That's the challenge. And it's a discussion that needs to happen everywhere, from the CEO all the way down to the employees.
This executive order, it's not just changing the laws, it's changing how companies think about this whole issue.
It's a wake-up call for a lot of companies. It's making them ask, are we really serious about this? Are we just doing this for show, to look good? Or do we actually care about making our workplace fair and inclusive?
There's a lot at stake here.
Absolutely.
So are there certain industries that you think will be hit harder by this than others?
Well, it's early days yet, but I'd say the industries that rely heavily on government contracts are probably going to feel the pinch more. Like, think about tech, for example. They've been having a hard time diversifying their workforce already, and now they're going to be under even more scrutiny.
We've been focusing on the downsides, but is there anything positive that could come out of this? Any silver lining, so to speak?
It's always good to look for different angles, right? Some people might argue that this executive order, even though it's got problems, could actually spark a more honest conversation about what real equality looks like.
So it could be a catalyst for something better.
Maybe. It could force us to stop relying on these, Band-Aid solutions and actually dig deep into the root causes of these systemic problems.
It sounds like we're heading into uncharted territory, a lot of unknowns. What should our listeners be paying attention to as things unfold?
Keep an eye on the lawsuits. That's going to be the big thing. Those court cases are going to decide how this plays out in real life.
So the courts have the final say.
Pretty much. Their rulings are going to set the precedent for everyone else.
Anything else we should be watching for?
Watch how companies react. Do they use this as an excuse to backpedal on diversity? Or do they find ways to stay committed to inclusion even with these new rules?
So it's not just about what happens in the courts, it's about how businesses choose to respond.
Exactly. They have a huge influence on our society, so what they do matters.
So we need to hold them accountable.
Absolutely. We're all stakeholders in this. What we buy, what we invest in, it all sends a message. We have a say in the kind of world we want to live in.
It sounds like you're saying this isn't just something that's happening to us, it's something we can actually shape.
Exactly. This isn't a spectator sport. We all have a role to play.
It's really incredible when you think about it, how one executive order can kick off such a huge debate. We're not just talking about laws and hiring practices anymore. This goes way deeper. It's about fairness, equality, what kind of society we want to be.
You said it. This whole thing forces us to ask some really tough questions. Like, can you really fix systemic problems by pretending they don't exist? Is a colorblind society really a fair one?
Yeah, these aren't just like theoretical questions. This has real impact on people's lives, right?
Absolutely. We're talking about livelihoods, careers, people's futures. This executive order is going to change who gets hired, who gets promoted, who even has a shot at certain opportunities. I mean, this could reshape the whole workforce.
Yeah, kind of scary when you think about it that way. Makes you wonder if all the progress we've made is, as solid as we thought.
Well, progress isn't always a straight line, is it? Sometimes you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
It's a little bump in the road.
Could be. But even when it feels like we're going backwards, it's important to stay focused, keep working towards a better future.
We can't give up, right? We can't just let this setback, or whatever you want to call it, make us lose hope.
Right. We have to channel that energy, that frustration even, into something positive. Demand more from our leaders, from ourselves, from each other.
So what can we do? What can our listeners do? It feels so big, where do you even start?
Well, there are lots of ways to make a difference. Support groups that are fighting for equality, hold our elected officials accountable, make conscious choices about where we spend our money, what we invest in.
So it's not just about big protests or political campaigns. It's also about the choices we make every day.
Exactly. Those individual actions might seem small, but when enough people do them, it adds up. Remember all the movements that have changed our society, the civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, all those, they didn't happen overnight. They took years, decades even, of people fighting for what they believed in.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. That change is possible. It doesn't always come easy, but it's possible.
This isn't the time to sit back and watch. This is the time to get involved, to make our voices heard.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways? What should people be thinking about?
The future isn't set in stone. It's something we build. The fight for equality matters, and we all need to be part of it.
Don't underestimate the power you have to make a difference. Stay informed, stay involved, keep pushing for a better world.
Well said.
Thanks for being with us today, and thanks for listening, everyone. This is a complex issue, a lot to unpack, but it's a conversation we need to keep having.
Absolutely. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep talking about it.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all.